Hello and welcome to another video. In this one we're going to continue our journey into XR Interaction Toolkit, but we're actually going to be creating our own custom feature, and that is the return home feature. At least that's what I'm calling it. You may have seen it in games where you've picked up an interactable object, you've let go, and it's gone back to where you picked it up from. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Let's have a look. Aha! But before we go into Unity, I need to say a big thank you to some of my Patreon supporters this month, and those people are Adam, Reflaben, Patrick Ordain, David Blissett, and Xeon Key. Hopefully I've pronounced all your names right. Sorry if I didn't, but you guys are awesome. Thank you very much, and you help make these videos even better. So here we are in Unity, and we're just going to use the scene that I had in my snap target or socket interactor tutorial. And what I've done is I just created this cube, which is my grabbable object, and I have this reset object script on it. So let's take a look and see what I mean, and hopefully it'll make everything a little bit more clearer. So using my trusty Oculus Rift, I've got my sword here from my last tutorial, and that's one of the socket interactors. This cube is just a cube, but this one is a bit special. So this is the one where, I just killed my microphone. This is the one where we can pick up the object, drop it, and it should go back to where we picked it up from. Now this is great in some games because if you've got very important objects, you don't want your players to kind of pick them up, chuck them away, and then that's completely broken your game because they can never find them again. Or if bugs happen and they go through the floor or something like that, you never know what happens. But with this one, if we've got an important object, we can let the player play around with it. They can still put it in all the socket interactors, and then that's fine. It doesn't go anywhere. They've snapped it to somewhere. But then when they release it, it will just go back to where we got it from. So if that's an important game object that's key to the flow of the game, it's going to go back to where we left it, so it's always there for the player. So let's jump back into Unity and let's have a look at what's going on. So you might be thinking, well, that's just easy, you know. In theory, it sounds like it should be fairly straightforward. You pick up our objects, and then when we let go, it's just going to transform position back to where we got it from. Now, that's what I thought anyway, and then I realized I had opened up a whole can of worms because I noticed that when I was trying to put it in my socket interactor, I was letting go, and it like did this little weird pop inside the socket interactor. And then when I let go of the object, say I let go of the object and it hit the desk, but I quickly picked it back up again, it would like flash in my hand and then stay there and just look a bit broken. And then when I dropped it, then straight away it would then go back to where we started from without a delay. Because currently when you let go of this object, there's like a 2-second delay that will allow you to like a cool animation, like a cool fade, and then it'll move. And it got quite complicated very quickly. So with this, I was intending on actually scripting out with you in the video. But what I think is actually easier to do is give you the script, all completely for free, of course, and then let you play around with it on one of your game objects. I'm going to go through the code with you, just so you know what's going on and where you can improve it if you want to. So let's dive into Visual Studio and see what's happening. Okay, so on my cube object here, top tips, what's that? Well, that's my other tutorial. Ignore that. Right, so we've got my cube, which is my interactable object. And there's nothing special really going on here. It's a cube. It's got the mesh render on it. It's got the collider on it. It's also got the rigid body and the XR grab interactable. What is different is I have the reset object script on here. And this is what powers all the behavior to allow the snap back to its original position. So we can go ahead and double click and open this up. And I'm going to go ahead and make this a bit bigger so we can have a look properly. Let's get my head out of the way. Going dizzy. And let's see what's going on with this script. So this is a reset object script. And there's a few things going on here. And I thought doing it this way is definitely going to be easier for you. Rather than actually going through and doing all this scripting in the lesson. Which will end up probably taking a couple of hours. Let's just give you the script and then explain what's going on. So first things first, we are creating a variable here, a private variable called mGrabInteractable. Now this is going to be the grab interactable script that sits on our cube. if you look here, it's going to access this component, the grab interactable. Then we move down, we've got a couple of private variables that are serialized, so we can see them in the inspector. One is a vector free, which is the return to position, and this is the position it returns to. One is a float, which is the reset delay time. So when you drop the object, how long does it take before it resets its position back? Then I have a protected bool called should return home. Now this is where I opened up a can of worms earlier. So I was controlling whether if your grab interactable was inside a socket interactor that it could interact with, if it was allowed to snap, then the should return home would be false. It shouldn't try and go back because it's where it should be. So this is controlling that functionality, and it's protected because it's only accessible by this class and any other classes derived from reset object. And then we have another bool for is controller, and I can't remember what the hell that does. I remember. So this is for when we're taking our hand away from the grab interactable. We'll test it. You'll get a collision there, and it'll try and register, and it's going to interfere with the should return home functionality. So we're testing to see whether the object that's colliding with our grab interactable is our controller or not. It's as simple as that. Then in our awake method, we're assigning all of our variables. So we're getting hold of our grab interactable script, and we're setting the return to position to this transform position. So effectively we're saying whatever position this cube starts at in our game is where it returns to when we let go. This is something that's customizable though. We'll be able to set this return to position to anywhere. You can give it any transform. And now we're setting the functionality for should it return home to true. So what we're saying here is that this bool is going to be true. So the object, when we let go, it can return home. So that's our awake method. And then on our enable method, this is kind of where we're leveraging the XR interaction toolkit and the grab interactable. So we're going to be listening for some specific features of our grab interactable, because when we let go, we're going to say when that event fires, we're going to then trigger this method on select exit, which is effectively going to power the method for going home. We're then listening for the select entered. So when we picked up the object, we've added a listener here for on select. And then on disable, in this method, we're then removing those two listeners. So what happens when we go to our on select exit? What happens when we've let go of our cube? Well, it fires this method, the on select exit method, which is just here. All we're doing is we're invoking our return home method, which is just below. And we're doing that after the reset delay time has been completed. So let's say our reset delay time is 2 seconds. Then after 2 seconds, our return home method is going to be invoked. So we've let go of our object. This method is called. After 2 seconds, it goes home. And all we're doing here is we're saying that if should return home is true, then we can put the object back at its origin point. And I've set this method to protected virtual. So it's only accessible by this class and any classes that derive from it or inherit from it. And it's virtual, so we can override it and we can do your own functionality when it returns home. Okay, and that up till that point was fairly cool, and that's where I started originally. And then when I started testing it, I was seeing a couple of issues, especially when I was letting go of the object and then picking it up straight away again, and then letting go, it would instantly go back to where it was. So I was listening for the select entered event from our grab interactable, so that if we picked up our cube, it would then cancel the invoke of our return home method, so that it wouldn't then instantly go back when we let go of our cube again. And then moving down from there, we have our on trigger enter method. And the first thing we're doing is a controller check. We're seeing whether it's our controller that's entered the trigger, if that's the collided object. And if it is the controller, we're just going to return true. And then we'll exit back out of this because we can ignore everything. But if the trigger we've entered is not our controller, then we need to check if it's a socket interactor. So what we're doing is on our collided object, we're testing to see whether it's got our XR socket interactor component. If it hasn't, then it's not a socket interactor, it's just a normal trigger. So should return home is true. So if we let go of the object within the trigger, it's going to go home. But if it is a socket interactor, we need to test two things. If it is a socket interactor, we need to test whether this socket interactor can actually select the cube that we've got because of our interaction layers. If you remember in our previous tutorial, we were looking at our interaction layers and setting it up so not all game objects you put in your socket interactor would snap, only specific ones would. So we need to test our socket interactor to see if our cube can go in that interactor. And if it can, if it's allowed to snap in that socket interactor, then we should make return home false because we don't want our cube to go from socket interactor back to home. So we turn off that functionality. But if our socket interactor cannot select the cube because it's on a different interaction layer mask, then we are going to return home. And then we move down to our on trigger exit method. And we do another quick controller check just to see that we're not colliding with the controller. And if it's not the controller, then should return home get set back to true. Because remember, we're controlling whether we can return home or not up here. But if we exit a trigger, we always want to return home. So it gets reactivated. So this is our controller check method. And what we're doing in here is we're passing it the collided game object, and we're going to test to see whether it's got the XR based controller on it. And this here is a ternary operator, and it's essentially going to return a true or false. But we use our bool that we declared at the beginning called isController, and then we check to see whether the collided game object has the XR based controller on it, and we're going to see if that's not equal to null. If it does have an XR based controller on it, we'll return true. If it doesn't have one, we'll return false. And then this is our return statement here to pass it back wherever we called the controller check method. So now we've gone through the entirety of the script and we've got a bit better understanding of what it does. Let's create a new script that inherits from our reset object script and overrides our return home so we can create some custom functionality if we want to. For instance, let me just quickly show you what I mean. So instead of our reset object, let's take that off. Let's remove that. Let's say we want to create a new script, new C# script, and we'll call this one reset object with extra features. Assign this back to our cube, and then we'll open up in Visual Studio. So here we are in our reset object with extra features script. I'm going to go ahead and remove the two using statements we're not using at the top. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll just remove these two as well. What we're going to do is we're going to inherit from our reset object class, because we're going to pretty much do everything we want in our reset object with extra features class. It's going to be more or less identical to the reset object class. So we're going to inherit from that. So we're going to type in reset object. You see it hasn't auto completed, and that's because I'm using a namespace. So I'm going to go ahead and I can use that same namespace over here as well. If I go ahead and put namespace level up dot grab interactions, take off the S, and now you can see here we're inheriting from our reset object script. If you haven't used namespaces before, it's just a good way of organizing your code. Not only will it also organize your code, but you can create assembly definitions that segregate your code and make your build process a lot quicker. I like to use them just purely for the fact that it keeps my code all nice and organized. So once I've got my namespace in there, I'm able to inherit from our reset object class. So I'm inheriting from this class here, which I've provided to you. Now, I want to override some features of this class. So if I was to go ahead and look in the inspector now, under the cube where we've got our reset object with extras, you can see because we've inherited from our reset object class, we've got all the variables, access to all those variables, so we can put in here our delay time, and the return to position is set during awake anyway to the transform of our current object. So what we want to do, if we look at our reset object class, you can see here we've got our protected virtual void return home. So we can override this in our inherited class. So back to reset object with extra features, we can say override, and then we can get a list here of all the methods that we can override in our parent class or our base class. So as you can see here, we can override the return home. So we're overriding this return home method, and inside we call base return home. So what we're doing here is once the select exited event has been triggered, instead of running our method inside our reset object class, we're going to override it with this one. So anything features we want to occur for this particular object, we could do here. So this is where you would create your custom functionality. So let's say, for example, we wanted to call a method that made our object fade away, and then it would be returned home. We could do that here. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and put debug.log inside override function or method. Damn it. So you know this one's been called. So then once all this has been done, all your custom code and everything you want to happen that's custom, it's going to call the base return home. So then what this means is the base class that our current class is inheriting from, which is reset object. So it's going to call reset object, and then it's going to call the return home method. So then everything inside here is going to be carried out for us. So that's how we can create our extra functionality. And if I go ahead and run this with our reset object with extra features script, you'll see exactly what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and don my headset. So here we are in VR. Let's give our object a test. I'm going to pick up my cube. I'm going to drop it down. And it should go over there like magic. And that's great. And that's working cool. So now we're going to test out our socket interactors. This socket interactor in particular is on a different interaction layer mask. So we shouldn't be able to interact with this one. What will happen is we'll go into our socket interactor, and our should return home value is going to stay at true. And then when we let go, it should just go back over there, which is great. And then once we go over here, what's going to happen is our onTrigger enter method is called. And then we're going to test to see whether or not this socket interactor is able to select this object that I'm grabbing, and that's going to return true. As you can see, it's going green. So our should return home ball is now set to false. So if I let go of this, socket interactor is going to grab it, and it's not going to try and take it over there now. But when I grab hold of my cube and pull it out of the collider, the should return home ball is set to true again. I let go, and it'll go back over there. And then if you look in the inspector, you'll see here that our debug was called from our override method to say that any custom functionality we've got would be taking place in here. So everything is working right with our scripts, which is awesome. And let's go back to our reset object with extra features. So I appreciate that some of you might not be familiar with the concept of inheritance in C#. A very powerful feature, and one definitely that requires a little bit of further research if you're unsure of what's going on. But all we're essentially doing is we're taking our reset object class, our big class that contains all the controls for returning an object home, and it's overriding our return home method in here. And it's able to do that because we specified it as virtual, which allows us to inherit reset objects in our reset object with extra features script. So what we're doing here is we're telling our reset object with extra features that it should have all the features of our reset object class, but it wants to override our return home method. So in reset object, once our return method is called here, where we're invoking it, instead of going to return home, it's actually going to use the override method, and it's going to do some custom functionality, and then it's going to go back to the parent object or the base class, and then it's going to call the rest of the return home method. So base refers to our reset object, which is our parent class, and then in that class we want to call the return home method. But I think that works well, and I think would make a good game mechanic to have anything important. Like the game kind of hinges on return home if the player picks it up and then drops it somewhere or chucks it over the edge of a cliff or something. At least that way anything important is going to get put back to its right place. ready for its interaction in the gameplay. And I think this script pretty much covers every eventuality. It's checking to see whether or not you've dropped it and then picked it up quickly again. It's also checking to see whether you're trying to interact with a socket interactor, which is all part of the XR interaction toolkit. And it leverages the select exited and select entered events from our grab interactable. So slightly more complex than what I thought it would be in the end, but I think we've got there. As I say, I'm going to provide this script to you so you don't have to sit there and type it all out. You can just drop the script on any object, in any grab interactable object in your scene, and it should just return home. You might want to tweak where it returns to, which you can just change the return to position. Override this here. And there's some definite improvements we could do to our script. So in our return home method, in our base class, reset object, I think it would probably be a good idea to switch off the rigid body and turn off the box collider on the grab interactable object just before we move it, because what I've noticed is when you drop it and it moves home, you get a little bit of a bounce because the rigid body is still turned on and the collider is still on as well, so that could cause some weirdness. So what we want to do is turn those two things off before you return to the position, and then once you've returned to the position, you could then call a method under here which turns those rigid body and box collider back on again. Well, there we go. Sorry it took so long, but I think we got quite a good little script there for returning an object back home, and it covers a lot of the situations where you might be trying to interact with a socket interactor, and also gives you the flexibility to override it and do some of your own custom features as well before it shifts back home. This script is going to be made available. I'll put the link in the description. And to my patrons, I'll upload the whole project up onto Patreon so you can grab it from there. If you liked what you've seen and you learned something really cool, then please leave a like and maybe drop me a comment to let me know if it's something you were looking for or something you felt you struggled with a little bit because of the complexities around the inheritance side of everything, and then I can move that inheritance video that I want to do forward a little bit and hopefully help you understand. That's everything for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.